if I might interject while you're
Yeah.
doing your Wizard of Oz magic there, there's a theme here, and in your country, and I actually studied a lot of international law. I've studied comparative legal systems, and the British, look what's happening there. They don't really even have a formal constitution, but in those countries that do, they're being largely jettisoned or regarding as a petty nuisance to the existential crises that must not be denied, which is a long list now. And in my first book, Small Farm Republic, published last year, I didn't really feel that I wouldn't be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist if I argued that they're trying to take over the world's food supply. But in my upcoming book, which I'm working on now, which is called Farm Hard or Starve,
Yeah.
working title. I'm allowed to
I
share
like
that, by the way, right now. What I'm trying to document is everything that you're studying. They've stuck their heads out, and they've shown us in Europe, and they're showing us in Canada, and they're
that.
showing us in the United States that there is a global effort to control the food. And if you control the food, you control everything else. And if they
Yeah.
get far enough, they can do whatever they want to our rights and in the courts if they get far enough controlling the food and farming production and distribution, which is what they're trying to do. Anyway, sorry, I see you have this up now.
I have this up. And so we're looking here, a Ministry of Environment. So again, to tip you off, we're entering the realm of climate change. So we looked at the Ministry of Agriculture and the Minister of Agri-Food, that went after farming. And here
Mhm.
we're going into the Ministry of Environment. We're going after that climate. We have to have the perfect weather in 1880, right? We have that Tuesday in 1880 where it was beautiful, and that's the only weather this planet can sustain, according to them, notwithstanding six ice ages and the interglacial periods between them. So this is that they get to do a summary of changes in land use in Canada, including in relation to disturbed habitats that could contribute to pandemic risk. So I'm afraid that this is so broad, but is has in its sights private property ownership, that has in its sights expropriation of farms, small farms, and the expropriation of small rural communities as a result of possible contribution to pandemic risk. Um,
There's
so
there's that great language again, using their language. It says changes in land use, which is very broad. Land use includes everything. I think I'm using some sitting on in a chair right now that
yeah,
could. So who decides what could is? How does a court define what a government agency? Well, this could, in fact, that's
yeah,
extraordinarily gray and vague, and we would say capricious and arbitrary, such as deforestation. We're given one example.
mm-hmm,
Um, so let's just talk about deforestation again. Deforestation we're told is so horrible, and that we have to rewild things to let trees grow back, even if it means growing back farmland that produces local food. Well,
yeah,
instead, I guess, ship the food from far away, creating dependency, but using a lot of fossil fuels to ship it, creating a lot of food security issues, potentially disrupting the supply. But
yep,
let's look at the science. Let's look at real science. Real science
yep,
shows us that properly nurtured grasslands, like by cows and rotated livestock, not overgrazed, actually sequesters far more carbon than forests. And it just seems to me that Canada has had some problems with fires from forests. So after the carbon dioxide is sequestered, that big magic religious word, into trees, they burn up or they rot out, and then the carbon's re-released. It doesn't
yeah,
happen with soil. Good land management practices would include trying to favor to put more animals onto land, onto grass, in lieu of cropping. They're not talking about, I don't see them talking about monoculture crops here, which are a
yeah, right,
horrible problem for climate change. And if we shifted more of those cows, the horrible deforestation, onto grasslands, we'd have fewer forest fires with obvious problems. We'd have lower climate change, and then you wouldn't need to use the climate as a justification for pandemic preparedness. I mean, it's a circular argument over and over, built on false premises,
Right. And you're saying too that, this they give including, but that,
but not
that
limited to.
means it's not
Yeah,
limited to anything
right.
under the imagination of these diabolical plan uh writers can go into this. And so this is horrific that a house passed this and has no imagination, or they're just, they've been whipped, your house whip, it tells you how you vote. There's no real analysis of what are the potential that this could end property rights in Canada, right? Under the guise of protecting us from climate change. This could end farming so that we're, eating printed meat, right? We're eating printed meat, and, a few people can get cows and eat beef, but the rest of us no. So you're right, land use could be anything, including in relation to disturbed habitats. So this is legislation that is overly broad. It's very threatening. And since it comes in at the time, anytime this is possibly invoked, is the time when, the WHO might be declaring some kind of emergency, a fake. It's pronounced fake, the PHEIC, right? So then your redressed from your other branches of government are a lot less. So the time to stop this is now. Um, a summary of measures the Ministry of Environment intends to take to reduce the risk that commercial wildlife trade in Canada and abroad. So, um, you know, there's commercial wildlife trade. So that's hunting. That can be the idea of also, I come from Northern Ontario where hunting is quite popular. We ate moose all winter. We ate deer all winter. If hunting was successful, that's what we ate. So it could be overly broad there. And just as an aside on the environment and climate, I did an environmental science degree with a minor in chemistry before I went to law school. And at the time, I was really convinced that I was taught, this is way back in the day. I've been a lawyer now for 24 years. I was convinced that, in fact, greenhouse gases were the demon. But John, I don't know how big your science is and your capacity, but I'll just throw this out there. Just throw this out there. When you're cooking your food, do you heat the air in your kitchen in hopes of boiling the pasta water, right? And so there's the law of thermodynamics. And generally, heat does not move from a cooler to a more hot environment, but dissipates from a hotter environment to a cooler environment. And there's no thermal volume. There's no thermal volume in air. And its capacity to heat the planet is very little, right? And we're in a 70-year solar maximum. And another just basic thought experiment. I mean, you've got these sheep and it's very cold in the background, but you're about to do hay. And when you go in to do the hay, and it's a very hot day, right? And you're sweating your brow. The first thing you might do to take a break is stand under a tree, and then you're in the shade. And it's the same air. It's the absolute same air, right? So the percentage of carbon dioxide uh, is going to be the same. And so there is very little transfer of heat from a, a air which has no volumetric thermal mass. It's so dissipated. And in fact, gases also have a behavior that when they heat up, they're more excited and they go further apart. They get excited and go further apart, right? The more dense a subject, the more a substance, the more it can hold the thermal mass. So you have the sun heating the oceans. You have the sun heating the rocks. And this whole greenhouse gas issue for me is a red herring. And so that's the difference between the allowable, the science, right? And
Hmm.
there's an incredible amount of data now that shows the sun is the dispositive thing. And the biggest greenhouse gas is actually water. And that water modulates very much our atmosphere, right? Because water becomes a cloud shades the oceans, and then you have a different temperature. You're also seeing underwater geysers and volcanoes, underwater temperatures that increase drastically in oceans as a result of the many volcanoes under there. So for me, the CO2 has now morphed into the boogeyman that they are using in order to get us to our consumptive interventions and the consumption that we have to reduce our footprint because we're at fault, and we're going to have our carbon allotment, we're going to have our CO2 measurement that we're allowed to have. And so how climate affects anything is actually it, it's a red herring, and it's an anti-human way to get us in our smart cities. And it would have been a conspiracy theory just a few years ago to say that, the WHO is going to do climate lockdowns. All right. But now climate is front and center of this pandemic preparedness plan act. So, that's a
Ultimately,
big mouthful.
morally, once you equate all life and give rights to plants that can't file in court, I mean, to the extent that plants and animals have rights, it's because, thinking moral humans act to safeguard them for them. You don't give them a seat at the table. Ultimately, the moral rubric here is that the highbrow gods of humanity believe that it is their moral prerogative to commit genocide against humanity to protect the earth, and that they are the self-anointed, self-appointed ones to do so. Now, I'm gonna spin your logic a little bit. By the way, I do have a science background. I started out as an engineering major, not so much environmental science, but certainly physics and a lot of good stuff you're dusting the cobwebs off of there. But I'm going to pivot on you. I'm going to
Okay.
say I'm going to totally ignore your whole argument. I'm going to say that's a scientific argument. You're trying to use science. And I'm going to say that if I'm a lawyer and I go into court and I don't want to set a greater evidentiary hurdle for
Requirement.
myself and
Yep.
my clients, then I
Yep.
need to surmount. So here's what I would say to you. As soon as you go into the red herring, you're now in the weeds of the red herring. And you're trying
Yeah.
to persuade people that already believe something that is wrong, that to the truth of it. Here's an analogy.
Yeah.
A lot of Americans believe that most or all racial disparities in this country are the consequence of white supremacy. It's a falsehood. And you can spend your blue in the face time trying to explain to people, but they so believe that, like
Yeah.
on faith, that, but you could then say instead, well, okay, instead of arguing about that, let me show you why critical race theory and imposing racist methodology throughout government, actual systemic racism is going to be the most horrible thing ever for racial relationships and for people of color. So here we'll just make an analogy. There are two ways I can show you that even if the globe was warming anthropomorphically, whatever it is, by human cause. I'm tired too today.
Yeah.
That the reaction, what they're doing is in two ways I can show you absolutely false. So, okay, you're a climate person, you're the climate cult, you can't sleep at night, you can't get a job because of climate anxiety, and you need a free check to sit home because you're so
Yeah.
afraid. Because
Yeah.
Greta Thunberg told you in 8 years you're going to boil like a lobster and the oceans are going to come up to Everest and all this absolute baloney. Okay. Now, it's all baloney, and I can prove it for this reason. First of all, it's a lie to say that renewable energy products are net zero. They're not net zero.
Yeah.
And the more you look at the
Yeah.
science and you more look at the actual externalized costs, and I'm only looking at greenhouse gases right now, just like with cows, as we've discussed, it's all a lie. Okay. and you're
Yep.
going to replace cows with more greenhouse gases. You're going to replace. So the second part of the lie is that you've now honed in with so little critical thought on just your deadly carbon, your deadly methane, your deadly couple of chemicals that you're ignoring. The EPA has identified now 12,034 and counting PFAs, forever chemicals, that stay in the environment forever, that stay in your children's bodies forever, that give you cancers, obesity,
Yep.
anxiety, maybe autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. I mean, never mind all those things happening behind the curtain. Let's focus on carbon dioxide. If you really cared about
Yep.
human health, if you really were going to look at the consequences of what you're doing in the name of countering this supposedly human warming, what you're doing is accelerating the warming, accelerating the destruction of the planet, accelerating the environmental destruction, all for short-term power and gain. So then you can kill us all, so you can rule the place like your new Nirvana, Martha's Vineyard. That is what is in this bill. What is it? I wrote it down so I could research it.
Yeah.
C 293. That is the
See,
roadmap. C
that's the
93 is the
roadmap.
road. Yeah,
Yeah. And to Lee, I don't know if you've seen this document, the C40 document here, the future of urban consumption in a 1.5 world. Um,
I have.
yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if our viewers have, but C40 takes the greenhouse gas budget of a city, right? And passes it on to the citizen. And so how they solve for climate change is quite interesting. And it's echoed by what we're seeing in this bill. And so if you go to chapter 6 on this, chapter 6, see, they look at um, where each consumption of a in a city is involved in how to reduce the greenhouse gases through reducing what we consume. And here are the categories: buildings and infrastructure, food, private transport, clothing, electronic appliances, and aviation. And so I'm going to go right to food because this is an extreme war on food. They say that food is 13% of total emissions in our cities, right? And this started with C40 cities, but it's moving to all cities through Global Covenant of Mayors and the concept of complete streets. So they measure the greenhouse gas and they say, how are we going to solve for it? And it says by 2030, we're going to have 0 kilograms of meat per person, right? That's the ambitious target. The progressive target would be 16 kilograms of meat. And you probably know that, it's roughly 2.2 pounds per
Yeah,
kilogram.
I know. I'm American, but I know remember, I live in England.
You know it. You know it.
Yeah.
0 kilograms
Yeah.
of dairy consumption of milk or derivative equivalent, and your government telling you 2,500 kilocalories per day. So when you say, okay, they've got a bill that's talking about climate change and food and meat, and that they're emphasizing alternative proteins, it also echoes the other globalist idea that you have to reduce your consumption of those items in order to solve for climate change. You are how you solve for climate change. Um, so it's very dystopic. And it works with these notions. Here's clothing, and it says that we'll get to 3 new items of clothing per person per year, right?
Hey, can I jump in here, by the way, and shred
I
this for you?
Yeah.
Is All right, so you're mentioning clothing. So that's going to get to my point three of how it is that your listeners and anybody looking at this with critical lens can quickly dismantle it as the fiction of technocrats getting paid a lot of money to fantasize. I mean, this is all science fiction stuff. And so, first of all, as Wendell Berry has chronicled in The Unsettling of America in 50 years of writing, pushing people into cities has been the most horribly dehumanizing thing ever. Destroying agriculture has destroyed communities, economies, the environment. People are drug addicted and miserable. The breakdown of the family. He traces it all to this very thing, this satanic, if you will, demonic push into the cities.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as Wendell Berry points out, and I write, and others, guess what? Where all the goods go from the city come from the countryside. If you push everyone in the city, then you have to set up a distribution system to go out into the countryside. And unless you're going to raise all the food in a big, heated facility, I don't know where you're getting the energy to build a facility to create meat instead of letting Bessie the cow walk around in the grass in the country. The entire system right now is sucks the energy and resources out of the country into the cities. It's
Yeah.
highly inefficient. It's not healthy for the humans. In fact, the healthiest human microbe in the world is that they've studied so far is in the Amazonian rainforest. The more you're eating processed food, the more you're killing your gut.
Yeah.
So this whole
Yeah.
idea that moving into the cities is going to reduce, pollution or carbon is false. It's a false premise, and we're seeing it. And people don't want to live in the cities. COVID showed us that. Number two, um, we you're seeing it right here with the clothing. Well, why are they going after food as one of their top? Why are they even calculating what kind of
Right.
caloric intake or carbon on food? That's my number one most necessary thing in life. Why
Yeah.
aren't you going after laptops, flat screen TVs, golf courses, motor boating, ski chalets? Where are the jet trips that these clowns are taking? No, there is a hierarchy here, which is choosing the most important needs of humanity to target first and foremost and completely ignore those things that are lower on the totem pole that have higher pollution levels and we could more quickly sacrifice. And the third reason this is bull, to not complete that word, is
Yeah.
because bigger is never better. The larger you get in scale, the more inefficiencies you have. You're not going to change people's behavior. As Wendell Berry says, you don't feed the world globally. You feed the world locally, and you don't solve pollution globally with a grand new Borg of absolute Huxleyan authority. Okay. You do it
Yeah.
because I make a positive decision to pollute less because you've informed me that it's in my self-interest and why. And it's never going to work on a grand scale because, by the way, people cheat. And in California, I use an example when they passed laws that you couldn't water your lawn during drought, water use went up. People sneak out at night and they start watering their lawn. This is the tragedy of the commons. This is just human nature. So we know this won't work, that it's counterproductive to the stated ends. It does increase their profits and their domination. That's number one for them. The other three reasons I listed is it shows that it's absolutely illogical and frankly, it's nefarious. It's
Right.
devious.
Right. It's very nefarious. And we talked about equity, right? And let's talk about equity as a communist idea. This is a gulag, the idea of you're in a place where your government is on your fork and telling you how many calories. Oh, no more bites. Don't chew that. Don't swallow that. You've already had 2,498 calories. And so, oh, there's my upgrade. 2,500 kilocalories per person per day. That's your government giving ultimate equity, right? Equity people think is the best education, right? The best equality in terms of job prospects, all sparkles and lattes and ultimate we all have pink hair. No, equity is the same number of calories. Equity is the same 0 kilograms of meat consumption and dairy consumption. And ultimately, equity cannot even as a moral program, stop its most horrid version, which is Stalinism, which is concentration camps, which is, Pol Pot. This idea that equity is anything good, we can see where they're going with equity, and it's your consumptive interventions, it's climate, it's 3 items of clothing per person, it's let's go to transport. It's 0 private vehicles, right? Per person by 2030. So it's not EV, that's just bait and switch. So you're in this city, you don't have a vehicle to get out. They're telling you what you can eat, right? And how they're getting you into those cities is the Pandemic Preparedness Act. They're going to change land use ownership. And here's your aviation. Can your city is telling you whether you can leave that city, right? It says one short haul flight per person
Mm.
every 3 years. So you're not allowed to go. You don't own a car. They're telling you you can't have meat, so they're probably telling you what comes in, right? And the way to change land use and private ownership and to seize all this stuff is that act that I'm trying to stop by bringing awareness. And I think if this act, this C40, that's a global thing. You can go, your viewers can go to c40.org and find out their cities. But I think this act is the domestication of the WHO treaty and is likewise, international in scope and coming down for all us citizens, including my beautiful American friends.
Well, and it is, and that's kind of like, but it's hard to tell people because I can't prove it. It's why they do it this insidious way. To make an analogy again, in Vermont, my battle with the state over our slaughter rights for farming, it looked like a fight with my state legislature, but in fact, the money came from the federal government to hire more people to inspect meat facilities, supposedly, and the ultimate end of that was actually to shut down local
Yeah,
processors and meat facilities. And so
right.
the money comes from captured regulatory agencies that are actually still there long after governors or heads of agencies of agriculture are there. But when you mention equity, remember that anytime you hear the word equity or stakeholder, often employed in conjunction with the word folks, it's very folksy. James Lindsay, the writer, talks about this. Equity is when they exploit poor people or problems to then exploit poor people and create more problems. That's what it is. And
Yeah.
or as Thomas Friedman said about socialism, it's when A decides how much of the B will give to C. And we're doing it here in Vermont, and well, they're doing it. And then we're doing it. Oh, in the opioid crisis, we have to give out universal income, universal food. It can be all dreamy and nice, but it destroys the economy, and it's not equitable. As Thomas Sowell explained in his seminal work, um, A Theory of Cosmic Justice, the more a government strives or a society strives to achieve equity, the more it achieves new inequities. The common theme, once again, is total government domination in the name of health, safety, disease, climate change, all of which are vague, unproven, and then you give astronomical, limitless power,
Limitless powers.
basically monarchical power. And so I would ask your legislators, looking at this, here's our future city. Are they going to mow lawns? Now, America right now, one study estimates that we burn 800 million gallons a year in our lawnmowers. I don't see where lawns are mentioned in here. We spill about 20 million gallons of refined gas on the ground every year. We use zero turn mowers. We buy 5 million new mowers a year. Haven't got into leaf blowers. I don't know what Canada's looking like, but you might want to ask your legislators, why don't you do something about the lawnmowers? Now, NASA says that lawns are a net carbon sink and they're good for the environment because they're going to stop that global warming. Only they excluded consideration of the gasoline and the lawnmowers I just mentioned in their wicked scientific
Yeah.
analysis.
Yeah.
Hey, these are just the people I want designing the city and way of life for me. This is total totalitarian domination. And if you put your head in this noose, you deserve the little cubicle they seem to be designing you for you here. This is a science fiction horror show, what you're looking at right here.
Yeah, it's completely Orwellian, and I'm hoping our discussion, reaches people who, otherwise would say, okay, well, everything on the green side, I'm just going to agree with and close my eyes, or everything that is on the pharma or health side, I'm just going to agree with, the experts. I'm going to agree to get governed by experts. I'm hoping our discussion shows them that no, you don't want to give away your personal sovereignty to elites to govern, because the path that they're going to is something that you and your family will not enjoy. Um, and we're closing up soon, so I just wanted to point out here that who else gets to decide in this legislation, in consultation with relevant ministers, a summary of key cooperative measures or agreements on disease outbreaks. So any, agreement out there on disease outbreaks and prevention and preparedness between the government of Canada and other foreign governments and key international organizations, including the WHO, the United Nations Environment Program, the World Health Organization, the Animal Health and Food and Agricultural Organization of the United States, and so it automatically legislates like a black box of future provisions that we even haven't seen that could be, even more dystopian, even more aggressive, right? Population population itself causes climate change according to them, right? So this gets into reproductive, it could get into absolutely anything under the sun that we haven't seen and that we don't have an ability to participate in. So, it's before the Senate. We need to stop it. And I think maybe you and I can, maybe in our Substack, share these videos, and I'll even share some of the drafts that I have for pushing back on the Senate. And you might, come up with your own ideas too, and share it too. I think you're going into a conference this weekend. Can you tell us about that? We've
Oh,
got
yes, thank you. Yeah, it's the Attack on Food and Farming Symposium, hosted by Children's Health Defense and Door to Freedom, amongst others. There are over 30 speakers, including Robert Kennedy, who's now come out against ultra-processed food and chemicals, much to the consternation of many in the industrial cabal. Joel Salatin, who's a farmer from Virginia, Stephanie Seneff, who's an expert on glyphosate, Catherine Austin Fitz, so many people, I can't mention them all. I am speaking as part of the group, and I'm part of the Door to Freedom group, which is particularly focused on vaccines and fighting the World Health Organization's efforts to inject us with their experimental, if profitable, vaccines. And so what you're doing is so important. I look forward to collaborating with you more. My Substack is called Small Farm Republic. I
Yep,
welcome people to read. I write about lots of stuff. We got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. But if you don't control your food, then you don't have anything else. So
that's
what
right.
you're doing is really important to alert people, and all roads lead to those list of. There you go, World Health Organization, the UN, they're all the same players. They're
Well,
all unelected.
we
They're
might
all.
get cut off in the next 45
Oh, so
seconds.
I'm done. Very good.
Well, I
You're
I
doing great
think
work.
I really thank you for coming and discussing with me. I wish we had more time. You're going to do great this weekend, and share with them our work today because they have the ability to bring it up a notch too, especially with some of the speakers you're going to interact with. Um, Thank you
Yes,
for
ma'am.
sharing your time with the Canadians. They're going to love this discussion.
Great. I'm